All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining in to the Solar Insure channel today. I am Ryan, the content specialist here at Solar Insure. And today I am delighted to be joined by David Dunlap, the VP of Product Strategy at Baywa. Who's going to give us some good in-depth look at procurement challenges that are in the solar industry and some of the unique market conditions that we have today. So, David, thank you so much for joining me.
Happy to be here, Ryan. Thanks so much.
Yeah, anytime. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I know we were just talking before we started the recording because what we're going to talk about and what you do and what Baywa is helping installers do is so timely for what's been going on in the industry in the past, not only couple of months or days, but years too, with just people coming in and out and planning for supply and procurement. So excited to get into that. But before we do, for our viewers out there, can you give us maybe just a little bit of introduction to yourself, your role, what it is that you do with Baywa, and the kind of larger role you play in the solar distribution landscape?
Absolutely. Yeah, I like to tell my story because it's been a bit of a journey. In my younger days, I was definitely an avid outdoorsman. And I call it my first career. It wasn't really a career, but out of college, I did experiential education, taking kids into the outdoors and teaching them about appreciation for our lovely planet. So I think my sustainability and sort of ecological bias started very, very early on in that way. My second and really primary career was home building, residential home building, and I was always an advocate for sustainable, renewable energy systems and green building technology. So I spent close to 2 decades in that environment, and it included my own personal journey on solar design, off-grid living, sustainable green building methodologies, and kind of grew that into the code compliance and opportunities for energy efficiencies integrated into particularly the niche I was in was high-end custom homes. So I figured if we're going to build large luxury homes, let's make them more energy efficient than just what's required by code. So that was kind of my big focus, and it took me a while to actually enter into the solar industry. But I had been working in that vein, in that sort of personal journey for about 15, 16 years before I actually joined solar in 2016. And that was joining Baywa r.e Solar Systems as a director of operations and procurement. And that role has just kind of evolved into kind of a forward-looking executive leadership position around our product and product strategy for how we service our customer base, which is the solar installer professional across the U.S., and how we link arms with the needs of the installer and ultimately the end user homeowner through supply chain back up to the manufacturers. And so working with best-in-class technologies and partners that understand the true value of aligning manufacturing, distribution, and installation services specifically for creating that homeowner experience and building operator success.
Amazing. And it's one of the interesting things of why I always love talking to anybody who works in distribution, because one of the things that I really didn't know existed in solar was the whole distribution model. Before
Hmm.
I got into it, the thought in your head is, okay, solar company goes to XYZ manufacturer and just buys product from there, but there's this whole other kind of wing of distribution to get that product out to everybody from large to small installer too. That is really unique, and that I think a lot of people, especially watching, may not even know exists.
It's absolutely true, Ryan. And I think I'm constantly surprised at how unique solar distribution is from other construction trades. And I think a lot of it is just it's because the product is newer, that kind of doesn't fit the same molds, or maybe it's that we as a solar industry haven't quite matured the way electrical or HVAC or even building materials has over a longer lifetime. But part of our excitement in solar distribution at Baywa r.e is to provide a differentiated experience and a national experience, but provided through local logistics and fulfillment services. Yeah, as you say, it may not always be obvious, but our focus is on that user experience and connecting the dots, making sure that it's as seamless as possible.
Yeah, and so you mentioned something there that is especially kind of rolling into the next thing I wanted to talk about too, with is that local market and servicing. I know Baywa does service pretty much the entire US, not the entire US, right? And plus, but one of the really unique things that I found is that there's not like usually a central hub when it comes to distribution. That you guys will typically have distribution centers across the country that are serving more local areas. So how does that help better serve individual communities and maybe even regions? And how do those places work differently? And how have you seen that evolve through the years?
Yeah, so we do have customers in all 50 states and some of the outstanding U.S. territories, if you can believe that. And I think the thing that is different, traditional distribution serving a local market involves many local physical brick and mortar distribution centers or um, uh, basically walk-in what am I trying to say? Um, Brick and mortar business units.
Right.
And traditional distribution, whether, it be electrical or HVAC or plumbing, sometimes those are affiliated with specific dealer networks and they have regional territories of affiliations with brands. This is really stark in the electrical realm, where the country is kind of chopped up into different territories and regions, and it's very vigorously controlled and moderated for competitive reasons. Solar hasn't had that kind of restraint. And so when we entered the market in 2008, our goal was to basically provide access to that network, access to global brands essentially anywhere in the country. And we wanted to kind of strip that mold of you have to be part of the network or part of the territory to have access to the product. We wanted everybody to have access regardless of where they are. So we developed a national centralized model of business that is executed through our regional and local fulfillment centers. So today we have 11 different physical locations, either third-party logistics or BayWa staffed locations where product is warehoused and shipped. And we use a combination of our own trucking services as well as third-party logistics to actually get the product to our customer. But like I said, we literally do have customers in Alaska. We are shipping them weekly or biweekly bulk orders so that we can kind of make some efficiencies in those logistics, and they love doing business with us because of the way that we can service them without needing to have a large facility in Alaska that is servicing very few installers. So we're providing a way, we believe, for a local installer to connect to the scale of a national distributor, national partner, accessing, like I said, best in class manufacturer partners, even if they are the only one in their community that is using that particular brand or that particular product. We may use it in other markets. We want to be able to give them a chance to have access to them as well.
Yeah, and it's so important too. And I love that that is kind of the model you're approaching because it, in my opinion, brings a lot of fairness into the industry, right? When you have some of these other like electrical or HVAC or anything else you mentioned there, like you can get into a place where some of the big guys have access to equipment that maybe some of the small guys don't. And it creates a competitive disadvantage. Whereas with the more, larger model where you can access anybody with locally, you put people on a bit more of an even playing field where it's like, hey, I may be a small, maybe newer installers trying to build a reputation for myself, but you have access to the same equipment as maybe the large guys. So you're playing on that even playing field.
Well said. That's exactly it.
It's great
Yeah,
commercial.
we it's about opportunity, and I think, yeah, because solar is not ubiquitous, we don't have, we have lots and lots of opportunity, but the penetration of solar in, the local markets is still, in that 10-15% of the grid connected, buildings. So it's not as ubiquitous as, some of the other trades. And I think there is a sort of a scale or a factor of density there that makes sometimes those local markets, as you say, a little bit more limiting. And we want to be sure that installers in any market have access to the products and services that they're looking for.
There you go. Well, speaking of those products and services and getting access to that procurement of equipment, I want to get into really the meat of what we want to talk about is that there are obviously, especially in recent days, weeks, months with some of the tariff impacts we've been having and supply, where things are being made, getting into that procurement challenges. So, what are you guys seeing from your end that are some of the most common procurement challenges that solar installers are facing today?
Um, Yeah, so this is a big one. Let's break it down with a little bit of the broad context. So, as we said, solar's not ubiquitous. We don't have yet robust US based manufacturing for all of the solar components. A lot of it has obviously been driven by investments and technology capabilities, manufacturing at scale capabilities in other countries. And let's face it, largely in Asia. Solar has been brought to market by virtue of global trade opportunities. That's also brought with it some challenges. And when it comes to U.S. trade policy, we definitely can get in our own way trying to protect the industries and the businesses that we're actually looking to promote. And I think that's really the sort of the fairest way, I think, to kind of couch and talk about the tariff landscape today. Regardless of where you fall politically, the basic idea of being able to provide more fair and equitable product and price of manufacturing in the US as it is today compared to the global markets, we want to have opportunities for US manufacturing. And we are incentivizing and encouraging a shift back to the US of manufacturing in solar particularly. The challenge is that it takes a long time, it takes a lot of money, and that our cost of manufacturing, we still haven't been able to achieve economies of scale and price points that other countries have. So there's a tension there, and sometimes there can be some impatience around kind of getting to the end goal before we're ready to. So the IRA package passed in 2022 created sort of dual incentives for investments in U.S. manufacturing. There was government dollars putting into U.S.-based manufacturing for particularly modules, but really any kind of product within the U.S. manufacturing domain. So inverters, the Solar Edge and Enphase made big investments to onshore the U.S. manufacturing there. And then creating the pull from the market with the domestic content adder incentive for the tax entities to take advantage of. So the combination of those was effective at incentivizing, but if we don't give that time to develop and create enough opportunity for multiple investments, multiple vendors to sort of dive into that space, then we still are dependent on imports to fuel the business, fuel the industry, and not everybody is in a position maybe to take advantage of that tax incentive. So, residential homeowners, for example, it they're not eligible for that. It's not a homeowner portion of the ITC. It's a commercial business tax entity opportunity. So the long and the short of all of that is that while we do have a lot of broad bipartisan support in pretty much all states in the U.S. for investment in solar manufacturing, we don't have it all onshored. And even if their final assembly of modules, for example, is based here in the U.S., the extrusion of the aluminum frames, the EVA backsheets, the glass, the solar cells, all of these other components may not be made here. They're being imported, brought in, and then final assembly done here. So that's the background, that's the shift, right? We're at this point where we're moving and onshoring more and more of that manufacturing supply chain at a higher cost than import costs. So the tariffs, in some ways, you could view them as a way for the administration to uh, kind of try to level the playing field. But unfortunately, what ends up happening is it just raises the cost to the consumer. And depending on where your product as a manufacturer falls in that supply chain, some were disproportionately burdened by these tariffs than others. There's some universal ones, steel and aluminum 25% tariff that impacts pretty much everybody that's using steel and aluminum in their products. But a good way to think about it for our listeners would be, where does the final product at point of import occur with regard to those components. So steel and aluminum, the real simple example is if you're importing an extruded rail that was made in say China or Indonesia or something, the full cost value of that finished rail product is what gets the 25% tariff impact at
Really?
customs here in the US. However, if you've got a US extruder that is buying the aluminum billet, that's the raw aluminum material that's put into the extruder machine, and they bring that billet into the US, the cost of just that raw material is what gets that 25% tariff impact.
Oh,
And
okay.
then the US manufacturing produces the extruded rail, and then that finished product comes to market. Now, there's no question that the US extruding cost of manufacturing is higher than it was overseas. That's why the import landed here in the US cost less. It cost less to manufacture, even though it had an added cost of being shipped over here. The net finished good pre tariff was cheaper, right? We already
Really?
knew that. That's why we were importing the goods instead of making them here.
Right.
Now, with the tariff, depending on where you are in that supply chain, if you are bringing in finished rail, then your tariff impact is higher as a percentage of the
Right.
total cost of that good than if you were buying raw material and extruding it here. And so what we're actually seeing is a little bit of a rising of the import impact for these tariffs and an equalizing, in some cases, even exceeding. But right now, so far, we're seeing more of a parity between the cost of that finished good imported with a higher tariff impact compared to the US manufacturing of the good. That was a whole lot of words, Ryan. But at the end of the day, what it means for the installer is um, while prices are rising and we have to think about how to accommodate that in our business, we may ultimately end up having less of a disparity between the choice of purchasing or procuring a US manufactured product or an imported product. So while we all may have different feelings about who we want to buy from and why, if cost is suddenly not so much of a differential, um, maybe we make some choices about where we align our procurement choices. And then there's going to be a little bit of a challenge there about overall supply. Do we have enough manufacturing in the US to accommodate that kind of a shift? And I would say, generally speaking, we do within reason because we're still in that process of building up the manufacturing base. So it's not going to be all options across all product lines in all segments, but I think we're on a path to kind of keeping up with the demand and the supply together.
Mhm. No,
Um,
and you mentioned so many important things that you're right. It's a lot of words, but it is so important because it's not as simplistic as sometimes it's made out to be, where it's just something flat. You have to do a lot of kind of cost calculation between finished goods and raw goods and bring in what's made where because it is such a, percentage type of tariff. And that's, you you touch even briefly on just the iceberg of an impact that this has to overall policy, which you guys are, you know, deep into it. But you mentioned a really important thing that I lobbed onto as well, and that's just the time and the resource, right? People kind of expect a manufacturing change like that to be able to happen overnight, and the reality is, yeah, it takes a ton of investment and time to be able to move not only just one piece of equipment, but an entire supply chain to
yeah.
onshore domestically. And that can cause, I imagine, as you guys are running into, a lot of challenges when it comes to actually trying to source equipment and keep prices low.
Absolutely. It is a big challenge. And I think it's important also just to say for our listening audience, if you're an installer, you don't need to go and do all this research and investigate all the intricacies of the supply chain. Certainly can if you're interested. A lot of people would be better off spent making different choices about their time to for running their
Right.
business, and leave it up to the manufacturers. But what we want to trust in those manufacturer partnerships is that the manufacturers are making the best choices available to them within those constraints. How fast can I pivot my supply chain? What is the impact of the tariff? How much choice do I have in contract manufacturing or material sourcing in order to still be relevant in the US market. And the players that I think own the highest portions of the market share are the ones that have been able to stay a few steps ahead of that and position themselves well. So I have a lot of confidence in those partnerships to be maintained. It doesn't mean that we can avoid the impact of the tariffs. I don't think the goal here is to say I cannot afford any increase in my cost of equipment. The perspective I like to remind people of is if we go back, if you've been in solar for a decade or more, prices 6, 7, 8 years ago were much higher than they are today. We know that there's still economic arguments to be made for going solar.
Mhm.
The specifics maybe have changed, and it's difficult when we've been on a downward price trajectory and then suddenly it bumps back up. But if you look at pricing historically in solar over 30 years, it's not been a smooth, continuously always down line, right? There
Yeah.
definitely, we call it the solar coaster because there are lots of ups and downs, not
Yeah.
just in pricing, but in, challenges and headwinds and tailwinds, et cetera. If we take a breath, we look at it in context. There are ways we can still make smart decisions, continue our business, and we just need to plan ahead, and we need to build resilience into our business models.
Yeah. And to wrap that back around too to Baywa, that is where having a partner like Baywa comes in with a distribution partner where you guys can really be that person to work between the manufacturers and the installers so that you are maintaining those partnerships and so that those installers don't have to concern themselves with the weird ins and outs of trade policy, right? They can just know that they're working with somebody who will do that for them, and then you guys can take care of finding them the best deals and making sure their business is still profitable.
That's our goal, 100%. And we're happy to consult and advise around that, have some conversations. Again, in our opinion, one of the benefits of our centralized business model is there, I can be available to speak to an installer in any market. I don't have to be local to them
Mhm.
to have a good conversation about these challenges, these decisions that are being made at the manufacturer level, or what advice or advocacy we might offer to the installer. So yes, we want to make that information available. We want to be a trusted partner to our installers, and try and yeah, be as transparent as we can about passing through the communications we receive from the manufacturers. And the installers shouldn't feel like they have to go to 1,000 different sources to gather that information. But yeah, they can get the direct information from us, or they can trust that the curated partnership portfolio that we offer is being maintained with all those things in mind. There is a reason that we don't work with everyone. It's a lot to maintain. It offers, in my opinion, too much choice oftentimes. So we like to keep it limited, but we also know that you can't. There isn't just one size fits all. So we want to have within each product category reasonable choices to align to different priorities, different market needs, different use cases, et cetera, but not so many choices that it becomes overwhelming.
Mhm. Absolutely, because it can get that way quickly, right? There are a million
Absolutely.
panel brands out there. There's a ton of different inverters. It can be tough to know what is best where and how to do it and where to be. But in terms of other ways that you guys are helping those installers, how is Baywa helping those installers manage any of these procurement challenges that they're running into, and how does like things like forecasting or purchasing ahead of time, what are the strategies that you guys are recommending to these installers to help plan themselves for the tumultuous market that we find ourselves in?
Yeah, absolutely. The number one is communication. Be in touch with your Baywa sales rep. Let them know what you're thinking and planning. If you have questions, bring others into the conversation so that we can advise and support. If we're in the dark and you just expect to show up with an order, whether it's buy a bulk amount to try and protect yourself for a month or so, or you're planning a transition, a shift in your sales to another product, the sooner we know about that, the sooner we can be ready to support you. One of my favorite sayings in distribution is we're not an infinite warehouse. We don't have 20 years worth of supply on the shelf at any one
Yep.
time. So if we didn't know that you are planning to bring 200 systems a month over to us, we probably aren't ready for that. We probably don't have that. But we're happy to align and support that shift, and we just need to know about it. So, to your point, the manufacturers also don't know. They're aggregating what they believe is the market demand, the forecast, but we're all kind of guessing. So, the more that we can come together in the spirit of a partnership and communicate about that. What am I afraid of? What am I trying to lean into? What am I trying to lean away from? We get better insights. We have higher quality planning and forecast, and understanding that these things take a little bit of time to adapt to and to shift. So when it comes to challenges specifically around price, we strive to give as much advance notice as we can. That does vary depending on how quickly the manufacturers have to react. But generally speaking, we try to stay at least 30 days ahead so that you can plan. Well, these are the orders that I've got already in the queue, and they're shipping next week. I'm confident those orders are still gonna stay at the same price, but outside of that 30 days, or sometimes we're able to offer more like 60 days notice, then I know when that price change is gonna, occur so that I can adapt and change, maybe even some of your sold jobs pipeline. So again, just communication and visibility. And when we do hear about maybe more disruptive price changes, we're at least starting the conversation early. We
Right.
don't like to hide from bad news. Nobody likes to talk about bad news, but it's important to get it out on the table and start to work through the details in the spirit of transparency and partnership. And that's an important uh, core value of Baywa.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, communication, getting it out there, right? Nobody likes to have that conversation. You're exactly right. That is a tough. I've been there. I've done it, and
Sure.
like having that. Here's what's going to have to happen. It impacts everybody, but it only gets worse if you don't talk about it, right?
That's right.
So it's
That's right.
it's super important on there. And I love what you said about we're not an infinite warehouse because that is just it's so perfect on that, right? So as far as like forecasting would go, then how far ahead do you, like, typically recommend that people are is it within that 30, 60-day kinda time frame? Is it as long as they could possibly give you for, forecast changes of what they might need? Like, what is the best practice there?
It's a great question. Our manufacturers ask us for 6 months rolling, and they get frustrated when we can't give them anything longer than that. But if you ask an installer, it's 30, 60 days is kind of what they're confident in. So we're saying, "Let's meet in the middle." We like to talk about at least 3 months rolling with our installers, and we understand some installers actually have sold jobs that are more than 3 months old because it takes that long for them to go through from origination to design and permitting, right, to scheduling and then installation. But there are some firms that have like a 7 to 10 day turnaround for that, and it's really fast. So what we're talking about when we're talking about forecasting is anything in that realm of sold job funnel, open pipeline. This is how many jobs I need to be planning to install for, as well as when are you planning to change your sell sheet, right? So if you've got a really long sales cycle and you've got a very deep pipeline of sold projects, you need to think about transitioning on the sales side much sooner than somebody else who has a really short sales cycle, right? So if you've got a 7 to 10 day sales cycle, really quick turnaround, instant permitting, and you've got crews that can install a job literally 2 weeks from when you sold it, you can react really quickly to those price changes or to other developments. But if you're one of the installers that has a much longer process, maybe your AHJ takes 3 months to turn a permit around, and you have a month or 2 of design and other pre-permitting, kind of pieces, then you really need to be, 1, have a mechanism for change orders without killing the jobs. You need to that's sort of a starting point for me is things will change within a 6-month window, so you absolutely need to have substitution clauses and ability to pass through changes in price or availability that you are not in control of. But then you also have to think about how and when you're transitioning your sales cycle. So looking further down the roadmap of the product manufacturers, and again, that's where Baywa would like to be able to have an opportunity to have a conversation and support on which things, where are we in the manufacturing cycle of a given module or a given inverter? How soon are we hearing about the manufacturers looking to the next generation thing? we can't get specific about those dates, but we can say that's a 2026 thing or it's a Q4 2025 thing. That's incredibly helpful for installers that are looking more than just a couple of months down the road for them or waiting to hear the announcement. The installer typically won't hear of a new product manufacturing until it's ready for release, and it's basically going to be hitting install or distributors' shelves within a month or two.
Mhm.
So, uh, yeah, having a little bit of insight into that further ahead of time and thinking about, is this a product I'm going to want to be aligned to? Do I want to make room in my portfolio for it, or can I rule it out and ignore the noise while I focus on something else? Those are I think very helpful for a business owner to be thinking about before they're faced with a choice of I need to buy this today kind of
Yeah,
thing.
absolutely. And what I especially when it comes to new products, how often are you guys finding that, like, when a new product comes out, people just jump and immediately want that? Like, I know, since I've been in solar, I started in 2018, with residential solar sales, and we were selling 275-watt panels, right? And that is,
Right.
that's peanuts compared to what we're looking at today. Like, how much is there just a jump to, like, I want the newest and best? And how much do you guys are you pushing back a little bit? Like, "Hey, let's forecast this in later," or is it just like, "Yeah, let's keep going?"
Great question, Ryan. And as we've been saying within the solar industry, it's not a one size fits all. It is kind of a matrix and a blend. I think that there definitely are some folks that like to be early adopters. They like to be differentiating with their customers in that way. They like to be at the forefront of efficiency or watt class. I need to sell a bigger module so I can put fewer of them on the roof, or I can talk about the newest exciting thing. So there's a little bit of personal choice there. I've also we've got installer customers who say that's bad for my business because now I'm the beta tester for the new product, and I maybe should expect a higher maybe learning curve or instance of tech support needed for some of those first installs. So some folks who have been burned by that take a more conservative approach and say, no, I'm gonna wait. I'm gonna be the third or fourth month adopter of that. I'm gonna let other people give it a go. So we've got a nice mix and a blend there. You've also got some business models where, like I said, if they've got a very long sales cycle, or if they've got a really robust sales funnel and it takes them a long time to get jobs scheduled, they don't want to change frequently. They want to stay on the exact same watt class for a full year or a year and a half if they can manage it. And so, in some cases, the change of the technology comes too fast for what the installer actually would like to have. We all want innovation. We all want that innovation to not only drive opportunity or efficiency or design, but also to help driving the price down. Part of driving the price down comes from commoditization, and solar really hasn't gotten there yet in the US. We have seen more of a commoditized market in Europe and in Asia and some other markets, but in the US, there's still a lot of differentiation brought about by brand preference or very clear technological differentiation. When everybody is producing the exact same thing, and it's just a question of what's the color of the logo, but it's basically the same product, that's when we'll see, less opportunity to differentiate, and then everybody's just sort of producing the same thing, and then there's a lot more just easy to to jump around because basically, any product becomes a substitution for another, and I really don't believe that we're there yet in the US. Even on the module side, which is the most sort of, I guess, commoditized product line within the solar marketplace, we're still not there. There's still reasons that this brand or this product technology or this cell type is different from another. We can make choices differentiated there.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, do you think the US is going to get there at some point? Like, I know there is such a especially among all the brands, right? You're always looking for that differentiator of what makes you different. Like, do you see the US getting there at some point?
I definitely do see it at some point. I think that where we're at with trying to manage our adoption and manage our trade policy with such a heavy-handed way, that's getting in the way of just kind of the true free market principles that would drive commodity based on, yeah, essentially aligning on the proven technologies and manufacturing at scale, driving a price, or having price determine who can be competitive in that market or not. So we're definitely globally speaking, we're at a higher price point for the cost of equipment. Our current financial incentive models come at a higher cost of money, cost of acquisition, and then our grid interconnection being so differentiated across 50 states, we don't quite have economies of scale again or harmonizations across markets. So you've got more complexity there. I think all of those factors kind of work against a commoditization, but I have no doubt that as solar becomes more ubiquitous, as it goes into every new home, as it is starting to in California, some of those things start to kind of levelize, right? Regardless of policy. But yeah, it's a lot of it is policy related. A lot of it is the uniqueness of the United States being, 50 different states that can make decisions and determinations separate from each other. We're not all on the same electrical code uh,
Yep.
uh, um, variation at this point either. So there's a lot of factors like that that play into it.
Yeah, I know electrical code I used to deal with like one town was on a different electrical code than the town next to it, so it's
Yeah.
a nonstop. Yeah, the U.S. is a very interesting market, so it's always fun to compare it to what we see elsewhere.
I think we
Um,
had one installer that told me that he had, and it's not even like a multi-regional installer, but that he works in 12 or 14 different electrical jurisdictions, just within their market. That's crazy to think about the
right.
complexity of that.
That's
Yeah.
insane. I love it though. It's just some of the fun that goes into it, right?
Yeah.
The solar coaster. It's a good time. So wanted to get into a little bit too. Can you talk about how now you guys at Baywa are positioning, yourselves to adapt over the next few years, given that we are likely going to still be continuing to have this global trade uncertainty and kind of ring around the rosy, if you will, of tariffs on, tariffs not. Like, what are you guys doing to help adapt to that?
So first and foremost, we go back to some of our sort of core principles and core values. We believe in resilience. We believe in partnership, and we're in it for the long haul. We're definitely not a company that is focused on short term sort of splashes or short term profit gains. It's about durability, and it's about long term sustainable value creation, up and down when we're talking about the supply chain and partnership. Yeah, we're basically at every inflection point or every policy decision point, we're looking at both what do we need to do to respond or react in the moment? What is the current pressure? And then where do we see that easing or changing in the future? So we're making kind of those both short, mid, and long term decisions kind of at the same time so that we're positioned to still be here 3, 5 years from now. That's super, super important to us. We're not just going to make rash decisions to capitalize on a moment or to avoid an impact in the near term if it's not setting us up for long
Mhm.
term resiliency. So, yeah, there's a couple of buzzwords in there. The resiliency being one, partnership, the long term value creation, I think, is super important. So, um, however that plays out, like I said, with our curated line card, our limited product portfolio, we're looking for partners that have been in business longer than their warranties. That's kind of a unique thing in solar, but
Mhm.
is always interesting to me to find partners where we can say, yeah, the bankability of this brand is more than 100 years old, and you're talking about a 25 or 30-year warranty on a module or a microinverter. That's significant, but let's be honest about how long that technology has been in the market or that company has been producing products that they stand behind. Those things do matter in the long run, and it's one of the reasons that we have a kind of a higher bar for partnering with manufacturers. But our belief is that it sets us up for that long-term viability in the market, long-term resilience.
I love that that's a core because it matches a lot of what we value here at Solar and Sure as well, is that long term, like what we're planning for. The industry has been so plagued by in and out, fly by night, just like you said, people who are giving 30-year warranties when they have been in business for two. That it's just like
Right.
something doesn't really
How do you
mesh.
do that?
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't mesh. And everyone's got the best intentions of always being around forever, but it's that long-term value and resiliency that I think in my opinion, is gonna be one of the things that brings the most value and legitimacy to solar going forward.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
That's our
yeah.
belief as well.
Yeah. So talking then for installers here, what are the most common mistakes that you see when it comes to maybe small or mid-size installers who are navigating tariffs and sourcing equipment? Like, what are the mistakes that they're making, and what advice would you have to them to try and just navigate these waters?
Yeah, there's 2, and I hope that this doesn't rub anybody the wrong way, because I definitely want, all of our listening audience to feel like they can find value in partnership with Baywa, but, the 2 things that I discourage, generally speaking, is 1, avoiding the conversation or, believing that you can completely avoid, the tariff, impact, right? I shouldn't I can't deal with it. I don't know, I don't understand, I'm just gonna not pay attention to it. That's a good way to get into trouble because the truth is right now, the impact, the magnitude of some of these tariffs is substantial enough that it could wipe out your profit margin. So you do need to understand and you do need to make some choices. It's important to show up and really tackle that. But you don't have to do it alone. It is important, like I said earlier, to lean into the partnerships that you have, be informed, make the choices, make the decisions that you need to make as a business owner so that you're not caught unaware. The second one is I think just sort of an extension of that. I don't think that it's smart to have a business practice where you're quickly pivoting and changing all of your core equipment supplies and your product selection in order to try and prolong the tariff impact. Um, Opportunistically, yeah, there may be a few opportunities. I'm gonna buy a month's worth of this now so that I can postpone the change orders to my customers by an extra 30 days. Sure, some of that makes some sense. But be careful that you're not just kicking the can down the road and not actually dealing with that change. And secondly, be careful that you're not setting yourself up for a whole new set of complexity in your business. Let's take racking as an example. Your installation crew probably has a strong affinity for the brand that you're using today. We all know as an industry that changing racking brands is one of the more difficult things to institutionalize within your business. So don't take that too lightheartedly. If you truly have a crew that is adept at installing multiple brands, great, have at it. But most of them have a preferred solution, and you're dealing with roof penetrations, you're dealing with homeowner, roof warranties that you might be responsible for if you do it incorrectly. These are not things to take lightly. So before you say, "Oh, I can just wholesale switch my business for 3 weeks to some other solution and save," you know, maybe it sounds like a big percentage number, a 15 or 20% increase in your racking cost, in terms of the overall system impact of the cost, that might only be a couple of pennies a watt at most, right? It could be a penny and a half or something like that. So really think about being honest, where you're introducing more complexity or change or chaos even into your business in order to save money on the bottom line.
So amazing advice, and that it's so helpful. I think what I really lean into a lot too is when it comes to the impacts of, the business, right? Don't try to avoid those costs. You have to do it. For lack of a better term, you have to slurp the noodles sometimes, right? It's not gonna be pretty, but you just gotta get it done, right? You have to get in there. So I love that advice, and it's great to have for installers. And speaking as someone who has been in that business, to have a good partner like Baywa, like other distributors who can help you navigate these waters. So I appreciate what you guys are doing for the all of the installers out there in the business.
Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, one other piece that maybe will resonate with some installers is to think about your actual cash flow and your ability to buy ahead. Most small or medium-sized installers that I'm aware of don't have super deep cash reserves in their business. So while it may seem enticing to buy an extra month or 2 months worth of supply to avoid that rising price impact, really understand what that cash outlay means to your business. And if it is going to prevent you from making payroll in 6 weeks or something, probably not a smart decision, right? So again, don't go this alone, have the conversations with your trusted partners, lean into those partnerships, and really think about the least amount of disruption you can make to your business rather than just focusing on it's this much more. The invoice line item is this much higher. Put it into context and really think about more from a cash flow management rather than an absolute cost perspective. I think
Mhm.
that's generally where small to medium installers get out over their skis a little bit, right? They are very worried about cost all the time. They have to be, but it's more important that you're keeping your business rolling in a healthy way than necessarily saving a buck.
Right, yeah, longevity. Longevity needs to
Longevity.
be at the center, resiliency of that conversation. So
Yeah.
and the thought process. I love it. Well, David, this has been fantastic, awesome conversation. I wanna definitely keep talking some other time, but for the moment today, thank you so much for joining in. I know all of our viewers and listeners are going to love this conversation. So, just to wrap up, where can any of our installers who may be out there, where can they get access to Baywa? Where can they, hear from you guys? How do they get to you?
Well, the starting point is absolutely check out our website, solardistribution.com. One of the easiest ways to find us is through your Google browser. Navigate to our website. We've got tons of great content and thought leadership. We've got some podcasts and recordings and articles and all kinds of things that are part of that home landing site. And then you can go into our web store. You can take a look around without being signed up as a partner. You won't see pricing, you won't see availability, but you can get a sense of who we are. There's some interesting tidbits in there about why you should do business with Baywa. It's a good introduction. If you are more familiar with us, absolutely reach out to your outside sales rep or inside sales rep and start a conversation. You tell them, I want to move beyond just a procurement relationship with Baywa. I want to talk to more of your leadership team. We're absolutely game for that. So just please reach out and invite us to speak with you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, David, for joining again. For all the listeners and the viewers, thank you guys for watching, and we will catch you in the next video.
Thanks, Ryan.